Well, going to move to a different story now. And a 31-year-old man has pleaded guilty to a public order offence after he held up a picture of 6-year-old cancer victim at a football match on his phone. He was trying to taunt the opposition team. Dale Houghton will be sentenced next month after mocking the death of the football mascot, Bradley Lowery, who died in 2017. Now, I'm as appalled and disgusted by this behaviour as any right-thinking person should be. But should it really be considered a criminal offence? Well, joining me now in the studio is former Metropolitan Police Officer and friend of the show, Peter Bleksley, who's alongside Tom Slater from Spiked Online, who's still with us as well. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Look, if this man, Dale Houghton, if he were, you know, my husband, my brother, my son, my father, a friend, I would disown them. Like, what sort of disgusting, foul human being thinks holding your phone up with a picture of a dead child laughing and taunting opposition football fans, that's an acceptable thing to do? We've got a picture there, someone else laughing as well who's not actually been charged with an offence, thinking that was an appropriate thing to do. It's despicable, it's foul, I wouldn't want to know that person, I wouldn't want to employ them, all of those things. But should it be a criminal offence?
Yes, because what he did sits perfectly within Section 4A of the Public Order Act 1986, which is about displaying a representation, so it could be a picture or in this case a photograph, which is deliberately designed to cause alarm or distress and be offensive.
Is that what that law was meant to be then? Because it's a picture of the little boy. Now, I can't imagine how horrific that was for his parents to see and other family members and friends of the family and any right-thinking person. But surely that legislation was brought in with a very different kind of image in mind.
No, I don't think it was, because football supporters, of which I'm one, tend to be a pretty tribal bunch. And we've seen cases of late where people have been arrested, for example, for singing about the Munich air crash to Manchester United supporters. And there have been other cases where people have found themselves ejected from grounds for singing anti-Semitic chants to Tottenham fans, for example, or homophobic chants to Brighton fans and these kind of things. And whilst us football fans are a tribal lot, and that is part of the attraction of going to football, to be surrounded by your fellow supporters.
That's a step too far.
Yeah, what Houghton did was beyond the pale. It was deeply offensive to Bradley's parents. It was upsetting, insulting, and so it fits entirely within the legislation.
I don't even think that people should have been arrested and charged over the taunting about the Munich air crash. Again, disgusting, appalling, and it tells us everything about their character and the sort of person they are. But I think that people should have a right... a right to be offensive and a right to offend people and say despicable things that other people don't like, but not face the criminal charges. Because I think that the trouble is, who gets to decide what's offensive or not? That's the thing. That's my worry, is because someone could be offended by something which someone else isn't offended by. It's the subjectivity of this law. It's in the eye of the beholder. Now, yes, it may well be, and again, this is about, isn't it, offending, you know, public decency, effectively, isn't it? It's a vast majority of people think that's offensive, then it's OK. But even if the vast majority of people think something's offensive, should it still be against the law?
Well, of course, who will decide that, which is your question. Initially, it may be a police officer who's going to make that arrest. They may deem it to be offensive. Then, of course, it may go into the hands of the Crown Prosecution Service, who may decide whether or not a charge needs to be brought. That could also be in the hands of a senior police officer, depending on the legislation. And then, of course, it may be a court that deems whether it's offensive, because if somebody was to plead not guilty, for example, then it would be perhaps a magistrate or
they could insist on a jury
or a district judge, depending if it was tribal at the Crown Court, of course. That would depend under which act and section the charge had been brought. So it does vary, and I completely think that we should treasure the right to offend people, but it's a case
of... God, we wouldn't have a living without that.
Exactly, exactly. But then when does the words, deeds, actions, and in this case representations, become offensive to the point that they break the law?
I just think, again, we're back to the situation. Do you remember, of course, when some people made a model of the Grenfell Tower with people jumping out of the windows from a bonfire night, and there were police investigations into that? Again, it was sick, but actually, you know, we burn effigies of real human beings on bonfire night. It's kind of a sick kind. Wonderful. It's one of my favourite celebrations of the year, but it's kind of sick when you think about the reality of it. Anyway, I just think that we need to understand the difference in this country between someone saying, that's horrible, you disgust me, I think you're a horrible human being and I don't want to know you, and saying, you should have a criminal record and you shouldn't be allowed to do that. I think those are two different things.
Well, it will be the judiciary in all its shape and forms and the criminal justice system.
If it went to jury and I was on that jury, I mean, he's pleaded guilty, I wouldn't convict on that. Tom Slater, you campaign at Spiked Online very much for free speech. Now, you know, Peter mentioned there, you know, anti-Semitic chants, homophobic chants. Now, anti-Semitic chants I would completely agree, you know, shouting about a racial group, an ethnic group, religious group in a denigrating way, that would be an offence that I would understand was something that should be a criminal offence. But should this have been a criminal offence?
I don't think it should have been. I think as a society we're really confusing words, utterances, behaviour that used to be dealt with by a clip round the ear from another football fan.
Bring back the clip round the ear.
To we need to call a police officer in and we need to put this through the courts. I don't want a situation in which police officers, with all respect to the profession, Peter, making that decision, because I don't want anyone empowered to make
They've not got a good record in recent years.
Offensive.
I mean, we've seen women questioned, we go back to the trans debate, simply for sort of taking a photograph of a poster saying, you know, trans women aren't women. I mean, there are plenty of people who'd like me to be arrested for the things I say.
People have been arrested in their own homes for misgendering people on the internet.
But again, by the way, point out, they're not misgendering, they're using the correct gender. They've just refused to misgender.
And I think this has been a big problem for the police in general, actually, because they have, in many cases, against their own will, been dragged into the culture war as a consequence of a lot of these laws which are on the statute book. They've been made to make these decisions. In the process, they've actually shredded their... a level of their respectability with a section of the public. And I think that's why it's in the police's interest as much as anyone else's that they don't get involved in policing speech.
Well, I'll come back to you just a moment. We've got some texts coming in on this subject, as we would have expected. Michael has texted in. He says, it is a criminal offence what that deplorable person did at the football match. The law in relation to the Public Order Act is very simple. A person is guilty of an offence if he displays any writing, sign or other visible representation, as Peter just said, which is threatening or abusive within the hearing or sight of a person likely to be caused harassment, alarm or distress thereby. I would argue that this ticks all of the boxes. If you could just roll the altar cue back down again, I some of the words there. I'm sorry, I don't think it's threatening. And I don't think it's abusive. I think it's horrible. I think it's in bad taste. Any human being who wants to use an image of a child that has died of cancer as a taunt in a football match is a despicable human being. You know what? If he was here right now, I'd spit on him. I'd spit on him. I think he'd be hounded out of polite society. I wouldn't want to sit next to him at work. I wouldn't want to be in a relationship with him. If he was a close family member, I would say, I disown you. But a criminal record, that's the bit I balk at. Nick thinks what the football fan did was disgraceful, but agrees with me it was not worthy of a criminal conviction. We are heading down a dodgy path if we make it a crime to cause offence. Where will it end? Peter Blexley, I mean, two very different opinions.
Indeed. And on this sort of very much this note, I'll tell an old story, if I may.
Uh-oh.
A very long time ago, a traffic police officer arrested a man for repeatedly using the F word and arrested them for insulting words and behaviour. Took them to court in the morning, and the magistrate actually ruled that in this day and age, or in that day and age, the F word didn't come within the legislation and acquitted the man. The same traffic police officer was in the same court in that afternoon with a traffic matter, and it was about a defective exhaust. He'd summoned somebody for having a defective exhaust which made a lot of noise. And the same magistrate said to the same officer, can you please describe the hole in the exhaust? To which he said, yes, it was an F. In great hole. The same word that the magistrate in the morning had ruled was not insulting. So what goes around comes around.
Absolutely. I just think we are going down a very, very, very dangerous route, Peter. And it's something Tom and I have spoken about many, many times, this really dangerous route where we are just constantly policing, quite literally, what people can say, what they can't say. I desperately feel like we need to have some sort of First Amendment, unless, like America, protecting our right of free speech, unless someone actually says, I'm going to kill you, or, you know, I want other people to kill you, I want to kill black people, I urge people to do it. Unless people say something as foul and dangerous as that, think people should be allowed to say things that other people really, really don't like.
But with regards to threats to kill, for example, if you were to say you're going to kill me, it's only an offence if I actually believe you're going to carry that out.
Tom, that's an issue, isn't it? The subjectivity. And with these non-crime hate incidents, this isn't a non-crime hate incident, it's actually a crime. According to this, he's pleaded guilty, obviously trying to sort of get the whole thing away as quickly as possible. But you know, non-crime hate incidents, someone who's not even there. I mean, we've had a case where a cabinet minister gave a speech and someone complained about the minister's speech having not heard it, but saw a report of it saying it was a hate crime to have said what the minister had said. The police got involved. I mean, this is madness. Now, that's what people say. This is just an image of a child, not just... I mean, look, if it was my child, I've got to be honest with you, I'd have paid Dale Houghton a visit myself. The police wouldn't have got involved. You know perfectly well what I'd have done. I've always thought I'd raise my patio a little bit higher, and that's how I'd have dealt with it, and how any family would. But this is the thing, we have to draw the line somewhere, and that line is being drawn further and further close to us in terms of what we can say. And
I think it's a problem, particularly for football as well, which there's been a lot of the spotlight on in recent years, because when you get into that question of who decides, you can end up with people making decisions that the fans don't like. For instance, we talked about Tottenham Hotspur, concerns over the years about anti-Semitic chants and whatever. I won't use the word at the moment, but the Y word, which Tottenham Hotspur fans identify as, self-identify as.
But it's not a word I would use ever.
In quite a positive sense, it's about identifying with the team and the Jewish community who have always formed a historic base for the team. There was a concerted attempt to push fans out for chanting that word at that point. And I think tells us everything about when you get into this question of who decides what is and isn't offensive.
And why some people could use a word and some people can't, doesn't it? But this is just about an image. And I said that's what we come back to. That, you know, this image, if it was an image... of something horrible happening to this child, more horrible than the awfulness of your child dying of cancer at the age of 6. I suppose that there would be a stronger argument, but I don't think we're ever going to agree on this one, and I think the public isn't going to agree on this one. But I just do that these laws have basically they've crept in without having a proper debate about it, Peter.
If we could just set our differences aside for a moment and imagine that we were both agreeing that this was a worthy case.
Yeah.
Then, in a certain regard, it's a good news story because the arrest was swift, the charging was prompt, and he got in front of a court very, very soon. So in that regard, it showed that the criminal justice system can deliver effective, swift justice if it wants to.
Yeah, he should have gone shoplifting. He'd have been absolutely fine, wouldn't he? Wouldn't have been an issue. I mean, but that's the madness, isn't it? That's
Sadly
the madness
so.
We're in right now. Well, look, there's so many different topics we can talk about around that. The freedom of speech issue, I think, is going to come up again and again. The idea of hate crimes, the idea of causing offence. I mean, I just think that fundamentally, you know, you don't have a right not to be offended, Tom. What do you think?
I think that's exactly it. We've forgotten that as a society, and I think we've seen what crazy things can happen when you do let that slip.
Yeah, absolutely. Really big thanks, Peter Blexley, former Metropolitan Police Officer. Always so good to see you. Thank you very much.